Okay, we are live on YouTube. No sign of Secretary Garcia yet. He said he'd be calling in. But let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. And I don't have my printed agenda. I will before too long, but there we go. Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan, or whomever is at the controls. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance and salute to the New Mexico flag in English and in Spanish, as well as the acknowledgement of tribal land. Anybody feeling frisky around the pledge?
I'll do the pledge.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Go ahead.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y a la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos.
Thank you very much.
We'll go on. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the Zia symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Saludo la bandera del Estado de Nuevo México, el símbolo Zia de amistad perfecta entre culturas unidas.
Thank you very much. And moving on to the acknowledgement of tribal land. I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Oh, you can, please, Dr. Gonzalez.
No, go ahead. Fine.
Okay, we acknowledge the original people of the land, the Tesuque Pueblo people and other tribal nations, and ask them to walk with us today as we share and learn together. Moving on, thank you very much to the approval of the agenda, I believe. Dr. Garcia, I believe we have a change.
Yes, Madam President and members of the board, we'd like to remove action item B. We still need a little more work on that policy, so we'd like to withdraw it for presentation this evening.
Okay, so we're removing item 6B, action item B. I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the agenda as amended with the removal of action item 6B.
I second that. This is Sarah.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Secretary Garcia, have you joined us? Nope. Okay, on the roll call vote on approval of the agenda as amended, Vice President Price?
Yes.
Secretary Garcia is expected to join us. Board Member Bose?
Yes.
Dr. Gonzalez?
Yes.
And the president votes yes. So we have approved the agenda. Thank you very much. Moving on to introduction of the interpreter. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Si alguien necesita alguien que puede traducir, por favor, llame el número 701-802-5152, el número de acceso 4277-932. El doctor James Lujan estará disponible para ayudarles.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, item 3 is public forum. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Tonight, we are ready to go to public forum. Mr. David Carl has been accepting the emails, and I'll just go ahead and let him go ahead and read the rules. And Mr. Carl, are you ready?
Give me one moment. Yes, I am ready to go. So I'm going to, as Dr. Garcia said, Superintendent Garcia, members of the board, President Noble, I'm going to start with the ground rules. Number 1, please listen and speak with respect. No uncivil conduct will be permitted. Number 2, please do not discuss any specific student who is not your own. Number 3, no sharing of time. Number 4, self-monitor and observe the 3-minute limit. Number 5, I will give you a 30-second warning when your time is almost up. Number 6, public commentary and dialogue is allowed only during the public forum, not throughout the meeting. Number 7, please search for answers on common ground. Number 8, you may speak on any topic, whether it is on the agenda or not. Your input will be taken into consideration. And number 9, please be advised that the board may discuss your issue during the meeting, but by law, the board cannot take action on items that are not on the agenda. And if you give me just 2 seconds, I need to quiet my dogs. Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with public forum in the order they were received. Number 1, the first one is going to be from Lisa Goldman. As districts in general and school sites in particular develop bell schedules, there appears to be little consideration for the amount of screen time required of both students and teachers during a given day. Currently, many high schools have developed a 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. bell schedule, which is 7 hours of screen time. This impacts not only young adult learners, but also the teachers providing curriculum. For example, in a Harvard Medical School study, pediatrician Michael Rich finds that the digital devices can interfere with everything from sleep to creativity, and that learners require a diverse menu of online and offline experiences, including the chance to let their minds wander. My concern is that creating schedules which reflect normal day-to-day school interactions will exacerbate symptoms, which I am already observing in my own students, symptoms such as insomnia, anxiety, headaches, depression, etc. Additionally, according to peer-reviewed research from Justin Parent, BA, Wesley Sanders, MA, and Rex Forehand, PhD, findings indicated that regardless of the developmental stage of the youth, higher levels of youth screen time were associated with more sleep disturbances, which in turn were linked to higher levels of youth behavioral health problems. Districts cannot expect students and teachers to perform as though they were business as usual. How can we ask students to be at their computers for 7 hours with a 35-minute lunch break when they may be asked to attend to younger siblings, live in households where family members are sick, unemployed, where the inequalities of our society are already exacerbated by COVID-19? This is not business as usual, and we should not have bell schedules that appear to ignore this fact. We have to find more creative ways to engage our students beyond 7 hours per day on Google Meet or Zoom. Additionally, requiring teachers to be available online for 7 hours per day minus the 35-minute lunch break is just as problematic. Adults are susceptible to screen time burnout, headaches, and insomnia as well as the strains of living in a COVID-19 world. I ask that the Board of Education more closely examine the impact of a 7-hour school day, which during our remote learning phase is held completely online. We need to reduce the hours of a school day in order to provide students time to schedule breaks, be outdoors, and utilize creative teaching in which students and teachers do not have to be glued to their computer monitors and smartphones. Thank you, Lisa Jo Goldman. Okay, next will be from Andrea Olechea Serrano. Hello, our son has autism and is supposed to receive special education services at NIE. It has come to our attention that even special education services are expected to be online. How is this supposed to work and meet the needs of toddlers with special needs? Furthermore, we are first responders required to work each day in person. How are we supposed to facilitate online special education for our son? Special education services are equivalent to medical services for many children, and online/remote learning is not the same. Not receiving these services in a proper format is going to put children already behind even further behind. We are very concerned and want to know how students with special needs are going to receive proper services and instruction. Thank you, Andrea. Next is Marilyn Barnes. I am in favor of integrated pods and using outdoor space soon. I am the choir director at Santa Fe High School. The latest study has come out from national music educators saying that if singers wear their masks and are outside, they would be safe. I want to return to face-to-face as soon as possible and when deemed safe. To give my students the best possible music education, I need small groups to be able to come together and rehearse. I know the students desperately want and need to be back singing and making music for their mental and emotional health. Whatever the school district and school board can do to back to get us back together safely in small groups. I fully support. Marilyn Barnes. Okay, next is Jamie Torres. What type of hazard pay and supplemental sick days will be provided to special education teachers and staff if they are expected to be in the classroom before general education staff? How will the opening group of staff be compensated for being put at risk first? And the final one today is from Reed Burgess. Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Dr. Garcia, as we consider again the health and safety risks of reentry and the nature of back to school plans, I want to offer some relevant data. The Santa Fe Institute released a document that provides information on how to calculate the chance that an infected student will attend school given community infection data in the school population. There's a link right below that. Because I teach at Capitol High School, I have applied their method to estimate the risk at CHS. Given 79 new cases were added this week, Santa Fe County's population of 150,000 people and CHS's population of around 1,450, the chance in a given week that a student that attends Capitol High School while infected with COVID-19 is 53.4%. Within 4 weeks at this level of transmission, the chance an infected student comes to school rises to about 90%. I believe this is actually an underestimate. For one, staff numbers are not factored into the population. Students in Santa Fe South Side schools are more likely to come from households where people are in higher risk jobs. Also, most of the cases are in an intermediate area of the city of Santa Fe. So rather than using the county population of 150,000 as the denominator, a denominator closer to 100,000 may be more realistic. Using that number tells us the chance of an infected student entering a school with Capital's population over a given week may be around 68%. Knowing that 80% of infected students will not present any symptoms, COVID-19 may initially spread undetected within a school like CHS. Considering this, along with new studies showing that over 60% of otherwise healthy COVID patients who were not hospitalized show signs of potentially permanent heart inflammation, makes me feel that reentry into school will present considerable risk to students and especially staff and family health. There's another link there as well. I thank the superintendent and the board for their time and consideration. Reed Burgess. And Superintendent Garcia, Board President Noble, board members, that is all of the submissions for public forum this week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone who writes in and lets us know your thoughts and the particulars of some of these very difficult situations that lots of families are facing. Okay, we are moving on the agenda to superintendent announcement and an update on back to school plans. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, and thank you. I reiterate what President Noble said. Thank you for your comments. Regarding reentry, I've received quite a few myself, and all the issues that are brought up are things that we think about every day. I'm so excited. Today was such an uplifting day. It was the kickoff of our annual Leadership Institute. I want to thank Lucinda, who were the sponsors of that event, and it was all virtual. But we are focusing on reentry, and I think it's some words that bear repeating: reboot, redesign, reimagination of remote learning. I think that's super important for our families, our faculty and staff to know that what they experience this spring will be very, very different this school year for a number of reasons. One, we've learned a lot about standing up a remote learning system over 2 weeks and a couple of weekends. And with all of that, a lot of input. You know, we've conducted surveys, people have told us what worked, didn't work. And also the PED guidelines have changed tremendously. And so we are going to have our first town hall. I don't have the date nailed down exactly, but it will be early to mid next week. And its major focus will be on just what parents can expect in this new redesigned, rebooted, reinvented, reimagined remote learning program. A big focus on social emotional learning. We recognize how difficult it has been on kids to be separated from their peers, and the sadness and depression and the importance of having building strong relationships early on kids will be with brand new teachers. We had Dr. Pierce this morning who came and spoke to our leadership, reinforcing that. And Sue O'Brien and the wellness team have developed a beautiful framework, a lot of resources for families and parents around social emotional issues. Parents will see, and I've said this before, a new, different, simpler, one platform for K through 2 and one platform for 3rd through 12th grade, which will make things easier. So a lot more resources and training for parents will be available. The CNI and IT departments have collaborated on these amazing lessons. And when we come back on the 16th, we'll share with you what a day in the life will look like for students by level. And students will not be in front of a screen 7 hours a day or 6 hours a day. You know, they will have a schedule, but there will be independent time, time for getting support individually from teachers or tutors or other support staff. So it will look very different. So I hope that people will give it a try. And we're doing everything we can to also connect with our partners to ensure that there are opportunities for them to engage and support our students. The other thing that I think is very important for people to know, that in terms of special education, when people have concerns about that, to really revisit the IEP and to ensure that perhaps compensatory time may need to be provided or whatnot. So any concerns about that, contact your special education teacher. We are very much exploring outdoor spaces, and there'll be, you know, more discussion about that, I'm sure. So many things that people, I think there's been an information vacuum as we've been developing and getting guidance from PED. Right now, we're still waiting for approval of our plan. Our plan probably will not be approved until the 5th of August. And so at that time, we will know more what we can expect come after Labor Day. As you know, our plan is a little bit different than Reentry for many districts in terms of their plans, as we intend to have a phased in Reentry. So I just wanted to share that. Also, we know that childcare is an issue. The state of New Mexico has put out a survey that will be available, if it's not already tonight, tomorrow on our website. And they're asking all school districts and charters to network with their community partners to get this survey out regarding childcare needs. And the state is trying to develop a comprehensive plan to address this. I know it's going to be a tremendous challenge, but I also believe there will be work that will happen here in our community. President Obel, I know this is of great interest to you. And so we will be working with our partners and you on this effort. We have received, I don't know the exact number, but we've heard probably from, I don't know, last time I checked, probably 1,000 of our families. And it seems, again, to be somewhat split in terms of how people are now enrolling for the rest of the school year. Some people might be asking, well, why do we have to make this decision now? In order to not create more disruption, for example, all the students are starting in remote with a teacher. And then we come back in, you know, whenever we can come back to school in a hybrid model and say their teacher needs to remain in full remote, then that would cause the student to have a new teacher, right? And so we don't want that disruption. We want whomever the kids start with in remote will be their teacher in hybrid. So therefore, we needed to know what families wanted remote for the entire year. If you recall, I said we really wanted to meet the needs of our families and those that want to continue the year in hybrid. And it's looking like a 40-60 split. It's still early to see if that trend is going to hold, but it looks like 40% preferring to be enrolled in online. And so those families will be enrolled online, and then the remainder will be enrolled in hybrid. But our goal is for them to keep the same teacher from the beginning to the end. And I think that's it for update on back to school plans, Madam President and members of the board.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garcia. And it's a lot to keep track of. And for our members of the public, the team at the district is working very hard to understand all of the requirements that are coming down from the Department of Health, the Public Education Department, lots of different places, and get the information out there. But I think it's important to reiterate again and again, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Garcia, but no one will be required to return to school. We will be offering a distance learning program for anyone who needs to stay out of the classroom if for whatever reason of concerns of health of a family member or anything else. Students will be offered a full distance learning program for the school year, correct?
That is absolutely correct. Yes.
And so, you know, because we're hearing a lot about people wanting to homeschool, and we just want to make sure that the community is aware that you can school through the Santa Fe Public Schools from home through a distance program, which is a very much reduced burden from anyone who is homeschooling, which would mean setting your own curriculum and doing these things that the wonderful experts and teachers at the Santa Fe Public Schools have already done through our distance program.
Yes, Madam President, and I hope that people that are thinking of that will also participate in upcoming town halls to find out what a day in the life for their student would look like. You know, if you're in high school or pre-K, kindergarten, middle school, I think it will give them a different sense, because it will be very different than it was last spring.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the update. Moving on to our presentations. The first presentation.
We didn't have board update?
We did not, because this is a special meeting. Would you like to do a board update, Vice President Price?
Yes, I would like us to take a moment of silence for John Lewis.
Thank you very much for reminding us of that. Yes, let's please take a moment of silence for Representative John Lewis, who was laid to rest today. Thank you all very much. And it's worth noting the New York Times published a final op-ed by Representative Lewis today that apparently he had asked to be published on the day of his funeral. And it is profound reading and gave me a good cry and a message of hope this morning personally. So
I watched his funeral and it was pretty incredible.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Vice President Price, for bringing that up.
Madam
Moving-
President,
Yes, go ahead, Board
May I-
Member Bose.
may I also ask a quick question regarding the superintendent's update?
Yes, and we assume, yeah, she can hear you. Go ahead.
I just, again, wanted to clarify, I know this was mentioned briefly at our last meeting, but again, for clarification, will the possibility of going back into the classroom in the hybrid model be possible after Labor Day if the numbers are low enough, or will Santa Fe Public Schools be doing the remote model for the 9 weeks as originally planned? I think there's a little bit of question about that.
So, Madam President and members of the board, and Linda Sink, I believe, is on. So I might, defer to her. So, Ms. Sink, if I'm off base, my understanding is our agreement with NEA was that we would start in when we can return in a hybrid mode when the infection rate fell below 1.05. for our, we wanted it to be our county, but they haven't been presenting county data. It's been, we're in the Northeast region. At that point, it would begin in phases. Our thought was that it may not be lower by, could be longer than the first 9 weeks, but that we weren't going to start right after Labor Day. That was not our intent. Ms. Sink, is that correct?
That is correct.
So it will be remote for at least 9 weeks.
No, I think it depends on the
Okay.
infection rate, transmission rate.
Okay. So it could be less time than 9 weeks.
That is correct. Correct, Ms. Sink?
Yes, and you might discuss the 1 to 5 to begin
Go
with.
ahead. Go ahead.
So what we've talked with our NEA president about is that we would go in maybe with just certain groups of people first, like K through 3, special ed, students that are very remote and having difficult times with internet, etc. Although I think that we're trying to conquer that as we speak, because we're getting them the what they need to have internet. Nonetheless, we would have certain groups come in, but still only at that 1 to 5, and then keep increasing like every couple weeks as we learn from them on how this is working in a hybrid format, because none of us have done it. I've been in education for 42 years. I've never done anything like this in my life. So we're all in a new world, but we have plans and we want to watch those plans. And I think with smaller numbers of students, it's going to be very helpful. And I know that our union president was very hopeful that we would move in this direction. And I think we totally agree with her, but we just need to see if our plan is going to be approved. We don't know yet.
And we mentioned that we are a continuous improvement district. And so, protocols for getting kids to recess, for lunch, all of these things, none of us have done it before. So we want to start with a small cohort of students to make sure all these protocols work. Are we going to have issues with kids with masks, taking them off, that sort of thing? And as we continue to move, add more kids, we can refine our protocols if we need to, as opposed to bringing everybody back and say grades K through 5 or whatnot. We rather bring them in slowly. And we agree with NEA, and that was one of their recommendations. That made a lot of sense for us to implement, our continuous improvement processes on this reentry. We still have to work out who those kids will be, which, like as Ms. Sink said, the students who don't have access, I'm sure students with high special education needs, the lower grades, right? So we'll work through it, and we'll communicate with everyone as that progresses. So our next step is to find out who wants to be enrolled in which, get kids assigned, get those schedules, and to get the approval from PED. If we don't, then we'll come back to you and say, okay, we'll go back with the union and say, all right, what does that mean for Santa Fe Public Schools?
Thank you very much.
Okay, ready to move on? Seeing no other questions or issues. Presentations. Our first one is the Latino Decisions Parent Survey on Educational Challenges During the Pandemic. And I'd like to welcome Marcela Diaz, who is the Executive Director of Somos Un Pueblo Unido, as well as Dr. Gabriel Sanchez, who is with Latino Decisions. And I believe, Marcela, you are going to start us off. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam President, Dr. Garcia, members of the council and the board. So Somos, as many of you know, is a statewide immigrant-based civil and workers' rights organization, and we are fortunate to enjoy a long-standing, good collaborative relationship with Santa Fe Public Schools. So we appreciate the opportunity to be able to present this information to you today. Just a little background: in late March, we convened a statewide working group of immigrant advocacy organizations to develop a strategic and coordinated approach to in response to the pandemic and its impact on our families. And one of our main purposes is to explore how local and state government can support mixed status families that are ineligible for unemployment, insurance, and stimulus dollars, to develop community-based policy recommendations in relation to the pandemic, and of course, to narrow the information gap between local governments and the Spanish-speaking immigrant community. And here in Santa Fe, we've been fortunate enough to work with staff and Dr. Lujan on a number of projects, including some Facebook Live forums to get information out to our communities, and some testing events that we've been able to co-sponsor and work with the schools on, some COVID testing events for parents and families. We also, I just want to mention, work with Mayra Valtieres, who's the Director of Language and Culture at the New Mexico Public Education Department, to help improve communications between Latino immigrants and parents and families and the schools in the state. And it was through a small contract with PED that we were able to commission, along with some of our other working group partners, this statewide survey and of Latino parents and grandparents of at least one minor child. And we've worked with, and the survey, as you'll see, is about the economic and educational challenges they're facing during the pandemic. And we've worked with Dr. Gabriel Sanchez many times in the past, as I know folks in the meeting have as well. And he's the principal lead researcher on these surveys in New Mexico, and we're very confident in their ability to capture good data from our diverse Latino community. And so to that end, he is going to present this information. We've presented it to PED leadership staff, as well as to a couple of other school districts, and we hope that it provides some additional information about families, what they're experiencing as you all make these incredibly difficult and critical decisions about the future, the immediate future of our education. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gabriel Sanchez, who's got a great slideshow with all of the information that he was able to glean from the statewide survey. Thank you, Dr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Marcela, for that warm introduction. Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia, I appreciate a little bit of time in your meeting today to give you a little bit of a background on this survey and some of the results specific to education. I'll note that a much longer slide deck is available at latinodecisions.com, along with several reports from this data. So if anybody would like to dig into more of the data, please do so. You will find that under New Mexico Parent Study on our website, again, latinodecisions.com. As noted, a handful of organizations, all that serve our Latino or Hispanic community in the state of New Mexico, commissioned this poll. I'd like to make sure everybody recognizes that at a time where data is really critical, these folks stepped up to the plate quickly to be able to commission this study, to provide data and make it accessible as widely as possible, as I know all of you are really tackling some tough decisions, and hopefully this data is informative for that purpose or goal. Won't talk in depth about the methodology of the survey. I'll give you a little bit of insights. If there's time for Q&A, feel free to dig in, those of you that want to ask more specific questions. You see it was just south of 500 Hispanic parents or grandparents of children 18 years of age or younger, and really was focused on learning more about the challenges they faced with homeschooling, et cetera, during COVID-19. I will note that it includes both parents and grandparents. 16% of the overall sample are grandparents that are the primary caregivers of the children that could answer the questions best for their family. Surveys were completed using a blended approach, both online interviews as well as telephone interviews conducted with both landlines and cell phones. Survey was available in both English or Spanish and carries an overall, you see, margin of error that's very in line with overall Latino decision surveys of 4.4%. I will say of the overall sample of 480 Hispanic parents or grandparents, 165 were of immigrants. So we made sure essentially we had an oversample of that segment of our community to make sure that data is reflective of that segment of our community. At the end of the day, data were weighted to match the demographic distributions of Hispanic families in New Mexico as defined by the US Census. So we could say it's both random as well as representative of the Hispanic community in the state of New Mexico. You see field dates were June 4 through June 12, so it's very recent data, and was a long survey, 20 minutes in length. So I'm gonna give you about 10 minutes of key findings, but note in the full slide deck, you'll have a lot more content to dig into, those of you that are interested in seeing that. I'm gonna talk specifically about attitudes and experiences of these families with education, noting that I know you all are facing some decisions specific to this round. first thing we did is ask an open-ended question of these families, specifically thinking about your children's education. What are the most important issues you think government should address? And we asked this open-ended. Folks could tell us anything in their own words, and we coded them into these categories. You see childcare is critical when you combine access to quality childcare while school is out, as well as access to daycare and early learning period. That totals 41%, right? So it gives you some indication that folks are obviously thinking a lot about access to childcare at this difficult time. A key theme we're going to point out across a number of different data points in the survey is needing better access to internet and technology is highly salient to these families at 29%. 36% wanting more information about how school will operate. That's going to be another recurring theme. More information is something that Hispanic families, like all families in the state right now, are very hungry for. And 48% help with online education. So folks could identify up to any 2 issues, again, in their own words, and you see this is going to track well across a number of themes we'll touch on across the data. There's a high level of concern across the state of New Mexico on families falling behind. So you see that folks are highly concerned that their children are spending too much time away from school and or not learning enough from online schooling, and are really afraid that their children are going to fall behind and potentially not be able to catch back up. When we ask follow-up questions on what particular subject areas they're most concerned about in terms of their children falling behind, as you might not be too surprised by, math was the area of greatest concern among parents. And also when we asked folks, well, what subject areas did they feel they were not equipped to be able to help their children with? Again, math was identified as the subject area where they would like most help with, whether that was direct support from teachers, tutors, one-on-one support. Math was the subject area that came up again and again across the larger survey. One positive for you, obviously a lot of this data is not the most positive or optimistic, but one thing I can say, especially when we compare this with the national sample, where we have a lot of similar questions for Latinos nationwide, there was very high approval of the way their children's school has handled the transition to distance learning as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. You see 80% approval versus 19% disapproval. So at the end of the day, I think commend yourselves on the incredible job you did under short notice with tight resources to be able to transition. And I think that's a positive, again, higher than what we see among Latinos nationally. We asked these families specifically what precautions should be made to ensure that schools are safe in the fall. And you see a lot of these things track with what PED and a number of other districts across the state are thinking about. More specifically, 87% of these families support having classrooms extensively cleaned every day and requiring teachers and students, this is key, teachers and students to wear masks to prevent the spread of virus. So 87% support in any survey is eye-popping because it's very difficult to get that level of concern really reflected as a consensus. So you're seeing that, as well as 83% supporting staggering school days to reduce class sizes. Again, tracks very well with Latino or Hispanic families across the state. 81% support a mix of in-person attendance versus distance learning. Again, reflective of the fact that families right now recognize the challenges with the virus and recognize there's going to have to be some aggressive steps taken, including 69% support for extending the school year if necessary to help kids catch up with their studies. And again, note, high level of concern that children are falling behind. So really extending the school year is obviously reflective of that underlying concern. You also see 63% support with continuing with distance learning only as a model. And this is key, not exactly 63% support. I would interpret being that everybody recognizes there's a need to potentially go to distance learning only. I would not say that means they value that over in person, but they recognize if that is needed in order to keep the spread of the virus down, you do see majority support for that module. And also 63% support longer school days if necessary to help kids make up some ground lost during homeschooling. So again, you see already concerns that children are falling behind and support for any mechanism to try to address that, including longer school days or keeping the kiddos in school longer in terms of the school year. Major theme I'm going to touch on with a few data points: digital divide challenges impacting education experiences, specifically for Hispanic families. As I touch on some of the specific data, keep in mind, all of you, I believe, recognize that New Mexico has some of the greatest digital divide issues in the nation. So seeing some of these data points aren't a big surprise to many of us that track this data, but I think seeing how it's directly impacting the ability to really provide education at home, I think is helpful, as well as some specific steps parents have asked for to make this a little bit less challenging for them. So when we ask folks, do you have regular access to the internet at home, period, you see 21% of Hispanic families overall statewide, and 30% of immigrant families indicate that they lack access to the internet, period. So that's, I think, a pretty eye-popping number. 2 out of every 10 Hispanic families basically saying they don't have reliable or regular access to the net. You add to that another 28% of Hispanic families across the state who indicate they do have access, but it's only through their smartphone. So that indicates, right, if you're doing anything in terms of learning modules, obviously doing that on a smartphone is not ideal. 74% of Hispanic families indicate that online schooling has made it more difficult or challenging to communicate with teachers, and online learning is just much more difficult for them now than it was obviously in the regular setting. And one key data point, even for folks who do have access to the internet, 50%, so 1 out of every 2 Hispanic families across the state indicate they don't have enough computers, tablets, or laptops for everyone in the family. You've got many families with multiple children all trying to utilize maybe the only computer that they have in the household, as well as families that are having to do work from home on that same computer. So even those that have access to the internet, if they only have one machine, obviously that's not enough to go around for everybody who's trying to access that right now at home. And as well as that, you see 44% indicate that online schooling or work has been more difficult because of technical problems, whether that's the websites or the programs not working. One thing we saw in the open-ended comments in the survey is a lot of folks who might have been able to get a loaner laptop from the school were very fortunate for that, but noted that sometimes the software required didn't sync with that computer. So they unfortunately were not even able to make use of it if they were able to get their hands on it.
He asked for it. But anyway, never seen it before.
I'm sorry, Dr. Sanchez, if you'd pause for a minute. I think we have somebody with an open mic. If we could maybe get everyone to just mute themselves if you're not Dr. Gabriel Sanchez. Thank you very much. Please continue.
Appreciate that. In addition to identifying challenges, we wanted to hopefully give you some standpoint on some solutions or some steps to make to meet these families halfway. So you see specifically when we think about computer and software challenges, 62% of Hispanic families statewide indicate being able to have a computer provided by the school because they don't have one at home or don't have enough at home, highly supported by families, as well as 75% indicating that they need updated software to be able to be up to date with what the children's school is using. So a lot of folks, again, even if they have a computer at home, unfortunately, they couldn't get access to the software or couldn't make it work with the computer that they have that might be a little bit more dated. We saw, particularly in the open-ended comments, a lot of folks didn't use their primary computer for homeschooling because they had to use it for their job. So they might have pulled out the old laptop or old computer that they had in the house, and unfortunately, it didn't sync with any of the software that was needed. So again, keeping that in mind as we think about the fall. One thing that identifies just the economic challenges a lot of Hispanic families are facing right now, you see a large segment, 44%, indicating that their internet or their cell phone bill is much higher now because people in their home are working or going to school online. So coming up with the funds to be able to do this is obviously challenging, particularly when we see huge economic impact from COVID-19 on Hispanic families. Again, you can see that on our website, just a couple of data points on the economic trends. 20% of Hispanic families statewide have lost their job already as a result of COVID-19. So thinking about rising bills to be able to do homeschooling in that context hopefully provides you some insights. A lot of concern, as you might imagine, as we think about starting in the fall. You see overall 76% of Hispanic families indicate that they're concerned that we will have to go either starting with online education or homeschooling or have to go to that model at some point in the academic year. And again, that concern is driven by the challenges that they face doing so in the spring. Give you some standpoint of the severe and important decisions many families are making right now. As many of you might have already seen in enrollment in summer programs, half of Hispanic families indicated they're not sending their child to a summer program, camp, or childcare that they ordinarily would sign them up for due to COVID-19. One thing to keep in mind is if families are already concerned that their children are falling behind, particularly in math, science, and writing, if they're not putting them in a program over the summer that might address some of that brain drain that we see among students over the summer, again, that's going to just exacerbate that challenge for a lot of families. And probably more indicative of what we're hopefully not going to see in terms of huge drop in enrollments, but the survey gives us some indication of 35%, so a little bit higher than 1 out of every 3 Hispanic families across the state, indicated they're strongly considering not sending their child back in the fall, particularly because of the fear of COVID-19 and the spread of the virus. You see that's quite a bit higher among Spanish language families in the state, where we see a lot of concern being higher among immigrant and Spanish speaking families across the state of New Mexico. And you see, although there's slight differences based on the age of children, with kids 5 to 10 being the greatest at 36%, you see pretty high level of high concern of not enrolling their children in school or programs in the fall because of the fear of COVID-19. So again, high level of concern is driving strong behavioral changes, including potentially not sending kids back to school in the fall. When we asked questions specifically about how schools can help kids catch up, again, noting there's a high level of concern about their kids falling behind, you see 82% indicating more communication on assignments and child's performance, right? So I think this is pretty much giving you some insights that in addition to just communicating what the plan is going to be, parents would love to be able to know how their kids are doing. Are they meeting expectations? Are they under expectations? How are they performing substantively as well as just attendance wise, given that a lot of parents are trying to do double duty working from home as well as keeping track of this? Having more communication from the schools would be highly valued. 75% indicate more in-person time with teachers, even if that has to be virtual. So whether that's small group settings with parents, obviously one-on-ones would be even more valuable, but you see again, take home message, more communication in whatever format that can be made available, and tutoring available for children, 75%. Ideally one-on-one tutoring available for children. Again, even if that has to be done virtually, that's something again, parents are very concerned with, especially those that don't feel they have the substantive expertise to be able to help out, particularly with math and science. Being able to have some one-on-one tutoring available would be highly valued. One of the things that we saw in the survey is that being able to continue engagement with families is going to be a bit more challenging, particularly if it's done in person. You see roughly half of the survey sample indicated they plan to participate less in in-person meetings, groups, convenings, anything that is done in person, obviously because of fear of spreading of COVID-19. However, 66% of parents report that they will look for virtual participation in any parent meetings, groups, or convenings. So think about this as a strong desire to be continuously engaged, but not so much in person. So any way we can figure out paths to be able to do that virtually would be highly valuable. And when we tested a number of different forms of communication with parents in terms of communicating with them in the fall, all of those tested positively, whether that was text messaging to cell phones, putting information on a website, calling them at home, sending them emails with any contact information that you have in the database. The only one that did not track highly or positively was calling their employer or making phone calls to their employer looking for them. Everything else basically tested off the charts in terms of means of communicating with families. So I'll leave it at that. I promise to try to be within 10 to 12 minutes or so. Again, there's a lot more content available at latinodecisions.com, including a wide range of the economic challenges that Hispanic families are facing right now. I'll pause there if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanchez. Yes, Dr. Gonzalez, go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you. How many times do we say that? You're muted.
It's the new refrain.
I think it was on slide 15. You said 35% of the families are considering not sending their kids back to school.
That's correct.
Does that mean not remotely? I mean, if we have the school remote, they're still not considering sending them? They're just going to keep them home? Or what are they going to do with them?
That's a possibility. And in fact, when we followed up with those folks and asked what they're considering, it's a wide range of options. Everything from a sizable segment noting that they're looking for any options for stronger online content than where their district might be providing right now, to actually, not having their kids enrolled, period, in the fall. And so I think the closer we get to the launch of the school year with more information available, keep in mind, we did this study at a time where there wasn't a whole lot of information available from districts on exactly what the plan is. I would expect that number to drop from 35%, but I do still think that we're going to have a number greater than 0 that are not going to put their kids back in school, at least in the fall.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? On that same slide, do you have any sense as to why the Spanish respondents were so much higher than English respondents? Do you think that's an information gap, or is there anything more that we can understand about that piece?
Yeah, I'll speak to that briefly, drawing both from this study as well as a national study we conducted with identical measures. And one of the things I think we're seeing in the data, which is surprising to some, is Spanish-speaking Latinos actually are more informed about COVID-19 than English-speaking Latinos are. So their knowledge of the fear of COVID-19, the consequences of it, just tends to be a bit higher than Latinos who predominantly consume information in English. So I think just their fear and concern tends to be a bit higher. I will say, however, that particularly in New Mexico, more information that is available in Spanish, specifically about education plans, is going to be vital. That is one of the things that we saw in this survey, is that access to information, as well as the desire to have more information, was higher among Spanish-speaking respondents.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the board? Or Dr. Garcia, Ms. Sink, Dr. Ryan? I don't know if any of you have questions while we have Dr. Sanchez here. Go ahead, Dr. Garcia.
If the board is finished, any other questions from the board, Madam President?
Not seeing any at this point, and Vice President Price will speak up, and I can see Sarah and Carmen's.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Sanchez. You probably had that in the beginning slide. What was the end size of the survey?
480 Hispanic families. 480?
I still couldn't hear you.
480, 480.
480. And were you able to get disaggregated all by region or by district, or the end sizes were too small?
Yeah, actually, noting this audience, I pulled Santa Fe County. I believe we had 73 respondents from that county. We didn't ask specifically about district. So that gives you some indication of how many folks might be in your jurisdiction.
You know, one of the things that we're fortunate in our district that all of our students do have devices, which I think made a big difference. We also had a smaller number than most that don't have internet access. And so, you know, we worked real hard to provide hotspots, but of course, when you don't have cell service, you can't, that doesn't help, right? But it was interesting what tracked with your study with what we found anecdotally is that more parents attended PTA meetings and other kinds of meetings because they were able to meet online. So I think we're learning some things from this, that working families do want to participate, but ease of participation, maybe you're having to cook dinner, you have childcare issues, and you can't really go physically to the school, but being able to connect virtually, it seemed like the participation, some of our principals reported, particularly in our high serving Hispanic schools, that the students more participation than normal, which was really great. But this was so informative to us. I think we're hearing this anecdotally that people need help with math, with science. You know, how can we bring tutors in? I'm already thinking with my team, how can we better use our digital coaches to help our parents, right? Like a call desk or a help desk, because I even run into problems with my computer and I've got to get on with the tech to guide me through things. And I'm sure families need that. So this was just a good reminder of some very, I think, basic things that are so basic, but they're so basic that we forget them, right? And so we're really going to dig deep into this and come up with some better practices, I think, in supporting our families. So I found it highly instructive and very valuable, and really appreciate you coming and spending this time with us. I like to also think we should take up President Noble's offer. Dr. Ryan or Ms. Sink or Ms. Wagner, any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask Dr. Sanchez while we have him?
Dr. Garcia, this is Tom Ryan. I don't have questions. There are some of the data is very similar to the surveys we've done, and it's good to have other sources kind of vetting the data that we're getting and appreciate the opportunity to use that data to help improve our fall program.
Very good. I'm happy to hear that. And I'll note that after giving a presentation very similar to this one to PED leadership, they requested if I could put something together for Native American families, noting digital divide, et cetera, might even be exacerbated for those folks. So with Chairwoman Noble's partnership, we've got an instrument pretty much ready to go. So as soon as we have, even if they're preliminary results, if I can disaggregate those for Santa Fe, I will make sure you see those results. Because I think like all of you, the more data we have, the more informed our decisions will be. So hopefully that will be helpful.
Thank you very much for that. We will hold you to that and appreciate the offer. Thank you, Dr. Sanchez. All right, last call, questions from the board. I do want to note that it sort of got swept under the rug that this district was awarded a national award for our one-to-one device policy that maybe nobody noticed because it came really at the beginning of the COVID times. And that's a credit to Dr. Garcia, Dr. Ryan, the voters of Santa Fe for our educational technology note. But it's great to see some of these things that make a lot of sense as barriers and how much this district has done to overcome them in having a device for every student, in getting those hot spots out to the students without internet access who do have cellular access. And I know that there's still work going on to close the digital divide for kids who don't have cellular access where they live or other challenges, and just really appreciate the district. I also want to take a point of personal privilege just to say thank you to Ms. Diaz, Marcela Diaz, the Executive Director of Somos, as well as the folks at Santa Fe Public Schools, Communities in Schools, YouthWorks, and all the partners for the testing event that Ms. Diaz mentioned in her opening there. That was really an extraordinary thing that happened, this open testing that was facilitated by those partners, this district, this community, and some really great stuff. So thank you very much, Ms. Diaz, Dr. Sanchez, for being here, for taking the time to share this with us. We really appreciate your data and the knowledge that you've shared. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to see so many friendly faces.
Yes.
See you again.
Talk to you soon. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next presentation. We're on to the SFPS 2021 enrollment staff vacancies requests for accommodations. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the board. I'm just waiting for the slide deck to change. Here we go. I'm going to have help this evening. Our Chief Data and Analytics Officer, Elias, I always tease him because my phone calls him Elias Bernardino, and Howard Exner, our Executive Director of Human Resources. So I think the first slide is, whoever is driving for me tonight, I think it's Alma. These are our enrollment comparisons from 2019. And those are the reporting periods and where our enrollment is right now. And we want to point out there's a difference between enrollment and registrations. So with that, Mr. Bernardino, are you available?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you talk through this data for the board, please?
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia. The first table you see on your left-hand side, the first day, we go through an ADM process, and you'll see that last school year we had 12,851. Typically, that number is a bit inflated due to families not sending withdrawal forms to either the schools or to the student data office. It typically takes a month and a half to understand further if a student is with us or if they move to another charter school. That's why that number significantly dropped from first day to 40th day. And for funding purposes, the state uses the average of 80th day and 120th day. However, the enrollment does not always translate to the membership, which is slightly calculated different. Anyhow, the end of year of last school year, you see that there was an increase. It was interesting to look at the data in the fourth quarter. We had about 82 withdrawals during the fourth quarter. However, we had about 120, I can't remember the number, specifically about 120 new students in the fourth quarter. And what we were hearing is because some of the schools were not as nimble as we were to do an online platform. They wanted their students to get a laptop and leverage our program. This school year, as of yesterday, we have 12,020 enrolled. I will specify that we have approximately 575 kinders that have not registered. So we are asking our schools and communities to advertise about the registration process. However, this year, we are expecting a lower membership or enrollment in kinder, because 5 years ago, we had a low birth count in Santa Fe County. It's actually the lowest we've had in the last 10 years. So we do anticipate a lower kinder class. And these enrollment numbers does not include the NM Pre-K program and the charter school.
Ready to stand for questions, Mr. Bernardino?
Yes, please.
And so again, we want to just, anyone who's listening, we're going to get the word out, get it on the marquees. Kindergartners, if you've enrolled but you haven't registered, please do so. The same with students that are entering the middle school or high school, even though they're enrolled and haven't registered, to please do so. So we're ready to stand for questions on this particular slide, Madam President.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Garcia. Mr. Bernardino, questions from the board? Again, if somebody could mute, we're getting some strange music coming through on the panel. One question, and I'm sorry if I missed this, Mr. Bernardino, when was this? As of 7/29, I see, okay, as of yesterday. So we hope that this will go up as we get a little bit closer to the first day of the traditional school year start. Dr. Gonzalez.
Madam President, Dr. Garcia, members of the board. So is this a month before school starts? It's not quite, it's a little less than a month. Is this normal to be that low? Will you get quite a few more students registered?
Madam President, board member, it's typically not this low. The issue is that traditionally we had our families go to their schools and register. And this time, due to the pandemic, we have an online registration, and my office is in charge of a central format of online registration process. What we do hear from some of the families in kinder is that they are uncertain about where they want to send their child, and they're waiting to see if we're going to do in person, or if we're going to do a hybrid, or if we're going to do online. Preferably, some families do want their child to attend school in person.
Thank you.
one other question, Mr. Bernardino. When you say it does not include New Mexico pre-K program, that means our 4-year-olds are not included, but kindergarten is, correct?
It's the yes and no. We have our Phyllis Nye school, which is 3Y, 4Y program. So these enrollment numbers include that school. It does not include the pre-K program that we get funded separately from our operational fund.
I understand. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bernardino. Dr. Garcia?
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. If we could go to the next slide. And we want to give you an update on staff vacancies and requests for accommodations from our employees. And I would like for our executive director for human resources, Mr. Howard Exner, are you online?
I am, Dr. Garcia.
Yes, would you like to go over the information more in depth for the board? Thank you.
I'd be happy to, thank you. President Noble, members of the board, Dr. Garcia, good evening. Currently we stand at 39 staff vacancies for the coming school year. You can see the breakdown on the screen. 4 of those are pre-K teachers, 4 elementary or regular. What we would consider regular would be secondary, but not one of the STEM positions. 8 special education positions, 7 bilingual, 7 STEM, and 9 other, and that would include generally elective areas, music, PE, art types of positions. Other elective classes that might be at the secondary level also that don't fit into any of the previous categories. As far as accommodation requests related to COVID-19, these would be the folks who are making a request to teach at home due to a variety of conditions or of being 65 years of age or older. As of when the slide was put together late last night, there were 202 requests, so the data here reflects that. If I were to update that right now, we have 217 requests. But of those 202 requests, 110 of them are teachers, and I just want to make sure we make note that not all 202 of those requests have yet been approved. When somebody makes the request, it does need to be documented, proving that they're 65 years of old age or older. Of course, is very simple. We have that data. But if it's due to a medical condition, we provide some type of a doctor's note on that. Dr. Garcia also asked me to touch a little bit on the staff vacancy position and the efforts that we've made this year. That would be above and beyond what we've done in recruiting in past years. Of course, in human resources, I talk in the office all the time that we're in the people business. But being in the people business is kind of difficult when everybody is not together and we're all working in our own homes and connecting through virtual environments. But we've made a lot of new efforts this year to recruit, some related to COVID and some that were already in the works prior to that. So I'd like to focus and highlight a couple of those. We do have a new recruiting video out this year. I encourage you to go online. If you go to our district's homepage and click on jobs, it would take you to that page. It was created with the support of the Community Engagement Department. What we did in the video this year, which is about 2.5 minutes in length, is try to focus more on selling not only the wonderful things about Santa Fe Public Schools, but the city of Santa Fe itself, because, not meaning to disparage any of my friends in any of the outlying communities around our state, but Santa Fe is a pretty special place. So we put together a video really focusing on the school district as well as the community itself and the opportunities that lie there. So again, I'd encourage you to take a look at that video. We began using social media last year for some targeted blasts. We heard of a teacher strike in the Denver area. We focused a Facebook blast in that area. Similarly, we heard of the same thing in the Los Angeles area last spring, so we had a blast out there. This year, we've started to become much more strategic with not only social media, but Craigslist. And we also have done a lot of advertising on NM Reap, which is a job posting board that is created by the New Mexico Coalition of Education Leaders. And we've specifically focused those recruiting efforts with certain job areas. So we've focused on STEM positions, bilingual positions, pre-K, some of the things that have been harder for us to fill. We spoke to not only our in-house experts, Dr. Patricia Azuara for pre-K and early childhood, Lisa Vigil for bilingual and multicultural, and asked them to tap their resources and see where we might be more successful in reaching out to candidates. We also did a lot of online research and tried to find where are the universities that are really producing a lot of qualified STEM teachers. So we used that information to focus our social media and Craigslist blast. Some of the places we reached out to were Denver, San Antonio, South Florida, Orange County, California, even Charleston, West Virginia, that's known to have some high quality STEM education programs there. We also did a lot of focus locally with social media. I know President Noble has mentioned in previous board meetings that we should have a pretty healthy candidate pool right here in town due to things related to the economy and the COVID crisis. And we've put together social media campaigns there to try to focus on some of those non-licensed positions, educational assistants, warehouse managers, student nutrition types of positions. So we've tried to be strategic in increasing our advertising efforts around the country, not just our typical focus areas. Also, due to COVID, all of our job fairs were canceled. I believe we participated in one job fair at the University of New Mexico in early February before COVID shut us down. That was specific to the speech and hearing education students. But since then, we've participated in some virtual job fairs that have been hosted around the country. Those would include one at Florida State University. There was one that was hosted by the Big 12 universities. Education Week, a national publication, hosted one a couple of weeks ago. I'd like to say I'm very appreciative to several of our principals and assistant principals that joined us in those job fairs to interview candidates. And we also hosted our own virtual job fair using things that we have access to at no cost. We used the Google Suite, created a welcome room that candidates would come to, then some breakout rooms that they would go for one-on-one or two-on-one interviews. And that was all run in-house very successfully. Final thing I'd like to say is a rundown of the vacancies that we have. Yes, having the number of vacancies at this point in the year is not the greatest news in the world. It's moving in the right direction. In late May, we started with 88 vacancies. And when I'm talking about vacancies right now, I'm specifically talking only to vacancies at the school site. Teachers, educational assistants, of course, but principals and assistant principals, interventionists, those people who are directly working with students. This is not counting student nutrition, transportation, district office positions. So we started with 88 of those vacancies at the end of May. And then if I took a temperature check each Monday after that, that 88 each week went down to 81, 73, 55, 52, 46 on June 29th. And we plateaued there for a little while because strangely, right around that end of the fiscal year, June 30th, we started to hire teachers at the same time we were receiving new resignations and retirements. So we kind of plateaued at that high 40, low 50 area. So the next couple of Mondays were 52, 51. Then we started coming down again, 47, 40. And today, the slide again from yesterday, 39, this morning, 38. So that is some additional information that Dr. Garcia asked me to share with you related to our recruiting efforts. And Dr. Garcia, I'll turn that back to you.
I'm just very proud of Mr. Exner and his team. They've really taken to heart making our recruitment and retention efforts more robust. I really do believe if we had not had the pandemic, we would be in a whole different place in terms of recruitment because these were extraordinary efforts. So even with that, we're making progress and we're moving in the right direction. And one of the problems that we're facing right now are the background fingerprinting. PED is now 5 to 6 weeks behind before they can release that information to us. And so we may have people hired, but not able to start on time because, you know, anybody that we hire from this point, unless they already had a background check, we're going to be behind 5 to 6 weeks.
5 to 6 weeks.
Yep. So I'd like to be ready to stand for questions if anyone has any.
Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
Madam President, Dr. Garcia, members of the board, is it still a year to stay out if you return to work for somebody who retires?
Madam President, that is correct, unless Mr. Exner, they can work 0.25, right?
That's correct. They can work up to a limited amount unless they've set out for an entire 365 days from whenever that date of laying out begins.
Yeah. So are you able to get many retirees back into teaching?
Madam
We have a
President,
considerable amount of return to work employees. If it weren't for return to work, we would be in a world of hurt. But they're also getting older and tired and wanting to retire now. And I think the whole state, I mean, we have a teacher shortage and we have, what is it, the fourth oldest teaching force in the nation? Not Santa Fe per se, but New Mexico.
Wow.
I think we have 300, right, Mr. Exner, of our 900 teachers are over the age of 60, around there.
it's over 300 staff members that are over 65.
Over 65, wow.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Madam President, this is Rudy.
Hi, welcome, Secretary Garcia.
Thank you. I was in and out. I was coming from up north from the Rio Riva County. So, sometimes we have good coverage. We don't have good coverage here. But I appreciate the superintendent. I don't know if this is the right time to ask or not, but how is pre-K going to work?
Madam President, members of the board, we have to start with pre-K online. Patricia Suara is, I don't know if she's on or not. I don't think she's on as a panelist. Ms. Sink, would you just like to highlight a few pieces about pre-K?
Well,
If
as
I
you
may,
said,
Madam President, just really quick, so some of the questions I'm getting asked is that if you have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, are they going to get a laptop? Are they not? How's it going to work? And so, for the record, can you just explain how
Yes, yes, Mr. Board Secretary Garcia, they all, the pre-K students and 3 or 4-year-olds will receive a laptop. Not a laptop, they'll have actually an iPad.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of planning and professional development for pre-K teachers, as well as how we're going to work with the parents, as well as the teachers. Ms. Sink was just getting ready to talk about the program, unless you were just concerned about the laptops. I mean, the devices.
Let's hear the update from Ms. Sink, if we could, please.
well, I was just going to say
I'm sorry.
basically the same thing that Dr. Garcia
Hold
stated.
on. Am I off of mute?
You're
So
off
just
of
really
mute.
quick, so those are just a question I have for individual parents that have like 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds as a do. How are we going to deal with the pre-K kids? So just for the record, if somebody can explain that to me, appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, please go ahead, Ms. Sink.
Well, the pre-K, which are the 4-year-olds, I think we're pretty set with the pre-K at this point. Although if we don't get full numbers, we can't run the program at particular schools. And we're still watching those numbers come in. We've been advertising like mad and having the principals advertise as well. But other than that, as you heard, we're getting the devices. They've gotten their professional development. It's not a perfect situation by any means. And they'll be one of the first groups that we try to get back in. And everybody hopes that that's what we do. And not all parents will still want to come back in. So we have to still work with that. That's what we know for now.
Thank you very much. Other questions from the board? I want to say thank you.
Madam President, this is Rudy again.
Go ahead, Rudy.
Sorry, my phone's a little messed up, but I'm coming in from Rio Riva County. But however, nonetheless, so can we just put that on the webpage? I'm sure we probably have it and see how we're going to deal with pre-K individuals what the do's and don'ts are. I know we get it. I get it. We get it. Just so that way, people in my district have the ability to know how it's going to work. We can please do that. But thank you, Superintendent, and thank you.
And maybe, I don't know if you've had a chance to see or if it was put out today, but there's a very good FAQs, frequently asked questions document that's been put together. I didn't get through all of it, and I don't remember whether questions about pre-K are included there, but that's probably a very good place for that information.
Thank you, Madam President. And actually, we're going to continue to update that. So every time we update, it'll have a date where the new FAQs start. But we'll take a look at pre-K and see if there's a need for additional questions there.
Thank you. And I just want to personally say thank you to Mr. Oxner for the effort. This is, as he knows, an obsession of mine, and I really do think that if you get the right talent in the organization, the talent solves all the problems. And I appreciate the emphasis that this administration and this district has put on human resources, because our staff are everything. And those numbers, strike me, given the uncertainty, as pretty darn good. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate that looking locally and thinking about the long game, because I do think we are seeing, I wrote down what Dr. Gabe Sanchez said about a high level of concern driving a high level of behavioral change. And I think that is included in jobs, career choices. And we saw today some pretty serious economic numbers in terms of, an unprecedented drop in GDP, gross domestic product. And so I do think that this crisis can be an opportunity for us to recruit people into the incredible, meaningful profession that is education, and also to note that we have a good health insurance through the Santa Fe Public Schools, and retirement benefits and other things that I think a lot of people anecdotally that I hear are increasingly important. So hopefully we will be able to figure out how to get educated people licensed, to get people qualified as teachers and other educational staff, and really work to reinvigorate our staffing and deal with the long-running teacher crisis, but with some of the opportunities that economic disruption may bring our way. So again, Howard, thank you very much. Okay, ready to move on to the action items. First, we have the consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about the consent agenda? And if not, is there a motion?
Madam President, move for approval. This is Rudy.
Okay.
Carmen.
Okay, we have a motion from Secretary Garcia, a second from Dr. Gonzalez. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? No questions? Okay, we will do a roll call vote on the consent agenda. Vice President Price?
Yes.
Secretary Garcia?
Yes.
Board Member Gonzalez, Dr. Gonzalez?
Yes.
Board Member Bozay?
Yes.
And the president votes yes. So we've approved the consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board.
Thank you. We have removed item B on under the action items, Roman numeral 6. So we're moving on to item C, which is our second reading of board policy number 249, employee prioritization for work accommodations during the pandemic. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. As you recall, part of having one of the assurances when we submitted our plan was to have a policy approved by the board and agreed to by our union, which is NEA Santa Fe, regarding prioritization for work accommodations. And I don't think there's any changes to it. So I'd like to turn it over to our general counsel, Josh Granata, on this one. I don't think there's any changes on it. Mr. Granata, is that correct?
Good evening, Dr. Garcia, board member, board president Noble, board members. Dr. Garcia, there's actually one change that didn't make it into the final draft. Recently, the CDC updated their high risk individuals. And so if somebody has cancer now, they're considered to be in the high risk category. And so I would ask the board to allow me to amend the policy that's before you to insert cancer for that one category.
Madam President?
Yes.
This is Rudy.
Go ahead.
If I may, I'd like to accept his amendment and move for approval.
Okay.
I think that should be two different votes.
Sorry, can you explain, Vice President Price? You think we need to go ahead and add it to the policy in a separate vote?
Yes, and then vote on it. I'm not sure. I would like legal opinion on that.
Madam President, I believe the way that Rudy introduced the motion is sufficient.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we have a motion that includes Mr. Granata's suggestion to add cancer as to the list. And for anyone who did not tune in next week, we did go through this policy in great detail last week. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
I second.
Okay, we'll record the motion from Secretary Garcia, the second from Vice President Price. Any further questions or discussion from the board? We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. We'll start with you this time, Secretary Garcia.
Yes, thank you for the staff for looking into that, and Vice President Price for your concern. Yes, I vote for that.
Dr. Gonzalez?
Yes.
Board Member Bozay?
Yes.
Vice President Price?
Yes.
And the president votes yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board.
Moving on to action item D, the second reading of amended board policy number 330, discrimination and harassment for students. Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Again, this is a second read. I watched this, much it'd be just the opposite. I think this one does have a change, is that correct, Mr. Granata?
That's correct.
So if you could point that out to the board, please.
Sure. And so, Board President Noble, board members, Dr. Garcia, as you recall, we presented this policy last board meeting, and generally this policy needed to be updated because of the Title I regulation changes. And so we changed the definition to sexual harassment to conform with the new changes to the regulations. Board President Noble asked that we change one of the pronouns so that it's gender neutral, and I did that. Board Secretary Garcia was asking about the definition of some of the terms within the policy. And so I looked at the regulation, and those terms are defined by the Violence Against Women's Act. And so I noted that within the policy as well. And so that's something that we could spell out a little bit more within the AR. But for purposes of the policy before you, those are the two changes that we made.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Granata. Any questions from the board on this one? Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez. I think you're unmuted.
I move that we accept this with the amendment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. Is there a second?
I will second. This is Sarah.
Thank you, Board Member Bozay. Any further questions or discussion from the board? We'll do a roll call vote. We'll start with you this time, Dr. Gonzalez.
Yes.
Board Member Bozay,
Yes.
Vice President Price,
Yes.
Secretary Garcia,
Yes.
and the President votes yes. Thank you very much. We approved the second reading of Policy 330.
Thank you.
Moving on to action item E, 2021 Board Committee appointments. Looks like, if our agenda is correct, we could use Audit Committee appointees from Districts 4 and 5, which is Secretary Garcia and Vice President Price, correct?
Yes, my present audit member has said he will serve again.
And that's Larry Mirabal.
Yes,
Okay.
of the famous Mirabal family.
Yes. Mhm. And Secretary Garcia, do you?
Madam President, I don't have an appointment at this time. I apologize. Thank you.
Okay. Vice President Price, do you want to make a motion appointing Larry Mirabal?
Yes, I move
Madam
that.
President, if I may,
Okay, go ahead, Secretary Garcia.
if anybody has any suggestions for my district, I'm welcome to that. Please let me know. Thank you, Madam President.
As just a point, it doesn't have to be necessarily from your district. I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you, Vice President Price. That's an important point for the Audit Committee in this vacancy. It can be anyone who would be a good appointee. It doesn't have to be a resident of the district.
Having said that, I move to appoint Mr. Larry Mirabal to reappoint to the Audit Committee.
Thank you very much, Vice President Price. I will second that motion. Any further questions or discussion from the board? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Vice President Price,
Yes.
Secretary Garcia,
Yes.
Dr. Gonzalez. Couldn't quite hear you that time.
Yes.
There we go. Thank
There's a
you.
lot of background noise. I don't know what that's coming from.
I think it's Secretary Garcia's phone. So there we go. It's a little better. Thank
Madam
you, sir.
President, yes, I'm sorry. I'm coming back from up north from Reentry County, but yes, I will.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've heard from Vice President Price, Dr. Gonzalez, Board Member Bozay, your vote on this appointment.
Yes.
Secretary Garcia, your vote?
Yes, Madam President.
And the president votes yes. So Larry Mirabal is officially appointed to the wonderful Audit Committee. Thank you all very much. Moving on to the Citizens Review Committee. It looks like Vice President Price, you have an appointment of Charles Patrick Padilla, is that correct?
Yes, reappointment.
Okay, do you want to make the motion?
Yes, I move that Charles Patrick Garcia, better known as Pat Padilla, be reappointed to the CRC.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
I will second that. This is Sarah.
Thank you very much, Board Member Bozay. We have a motion by Vice President Price, a second by Board Member Bozay. Any further questions or discussion from the board? We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Secretary Garcia?
Yes.
Dr. Gonzalez?
Yes.
By Dr. Gonzalez, and Secretary Garcia, if you could mute, because you seem to overwhelm Dr. Gonzalez's microphone with your sound.
So did you get my vote? Yes?
Thank you very much. Board Member Bozay,
Yes.
Vice President Price,
Yes.
And the president votes yes. Thank you very much. We have reappointed Pat Padilla to the Citizens Review Committee. Okay, moving on the agenda to board discussion and possible action. And I put a couple things on the agenda here. The first one being facilitating integrated pods. And just want to say that, and first kick off sort of this and have a chance, I'm hoping for a little bit of a discussion here. But just to say, I recognize the incredible work being done at the Santa Fe Public Schools. And I think it's very difficult in the community and for those of us that are parents facing uncertainty. I know it's true of staff members as well, to be patient and let the folks in the district do all of the things that they need to do. And this is, I think it's pretty clear to everyone, unprecedented, the disruption that we're looking at. And I am so proud and so pleased to be a part of this work with the Santa Fe Public Schools and with Dr. Garcia and her leadership and the team that is really reinventing things in an unprecedented way. And with no breaks, having stood up a distance learning program incredibly quickly, worked to meet the nutritional needs of students, and just deal with all of the things. And I really think there's incredible work going on. It's clear in part now in this pandemic, the amount of society's burden that has been shifted to schools and underfunded pretty chronically, I would say, for the better part of 2 decades, whether it's food and food security being our responsibility now, healthcare, emotional wellness, so many things. And I think we really are getting a sense in this pandemic of how much has been put on the school. And it's really extraordinary, and I just want to really acknowledge how much work and stress and emotional energy and actual energy of all sorts is going into this right now. I also want to thank Vice President Price. Since our last meeting, I have reflected on her message about being a survivor of polio and the lessons that we can learn from that. And I actually have found myself thinking and feeling that what Vice President Price had to say in our last meeting about that, it was a real beacon of hope for me in terms of what we're facing, because this is, it feels pretty awful. Particularly, for lots of people, and for those that have lost their jobs or are facing extreme economic insecurity, for working families out there, all of this it's easy to despair. And the message of hope from a previous pandemic is really important to keep in mind, and has been a real light in the darkness for me. So I put this item on the agenda for board discussion with all of that as a preamble, in part to say, as I watch these things and it's a national conversation, there's a lot of concern that we will backslide, in terms of the progress we've made in public education, in terms of integration, and in terms of really closing gaps and providing more equity for students and those who could use more resources. And, I again want to emphasize that this is, the wounds being suffered in public education, the disenrollment, the families that can afford to transfer to private schools, all of this is a grave concern to me. And again, I'm afraid that we will backslide in a lot of the progress made in public education. So I wanted to, and I know Dr. Garcia has thought about this, and I would imagine some of my fellow board members have, but just ask and put the question and discussion out there as to what we can do to think about support for integrated pods and or what we heard from Dr. Sanchez's presentation, tutoring and support for distance learning in order to increase integration and equity. We're seeing some pretty surreal things happening between childcare, which is part of my day job, as I think many know, in early childhood, and the K-12, the public education issues, what's happening with working parents. Many working parents are hiring tutors or governesses or au pairs or you name it. You can throw a lot of words at it. And I don't pretend that there's going to be any perfect or even great solutions, but feel pretty strongly that if we do even some small things, it might be better than nothing. So I guess I first want to ask Dr. Garcia to share some thoughts and then open it up to board members for any thoughts and discussion on how we might facilitate greater integration and equity during distance learning. Dr. Garcia.
Madam President, members of the board. Wow, I mean, it's so complex. And I think you really laid a very good context that people are just want to do right by their children, I think, at the end of the day. And we're in such uncharted waters that, you know, when you're making high risk, what you believe are high risk decisions about your children, how they're going to progress educationally, what's happening to them, their emotional well-being, and comparing that to their experience this spring exacerbates it. I hope that the town halls that are coming up and the opportunities for like today, the principals got to see firsthand all the planning. In the next few days, teachers will get to see it. Parents will get to see it. I think it's going to help ratchet down because in an information vacuum, people make up things in their mind, right? You can't help it. And so some, you know, and we have to remember that perception is reality. So even though the reality may not be what people think it is, if they have that perception, it might as well be the reality. And so we have a heavy lift to do in terms of communication. The district has to be very careful in terms of what we can do, but I've heard a lot of requests about email addresses and can we provide them? And I think and that helps facilitate that process for parents to talk to each other. And I think that the perception is that information can't be shared. Well, the reality is it can. And we talked to the principals today, and unless a parent marked the little box when they register their children, just like you do whether or not your children can be photographed or videoed, that information can be shared. And the principals, the PTAs can share that information. What is of concern, and I think you brought it up, is equity. And we, you know, just like we can't prevent families to have play dates or, you know, right now in the pandemic, or to have little pods of kids getting together, you know, I mean, that's out of our purview. We recognize the need for tutoring and support, and we've got to figure out how can we level the playing field for families that maybe can't get in a pod and hire a tutor or do some of those things. And how can we look at this through an equity lens? And how can we better communicate with our families to allay some of their concerns? Here's something that some people aren't aware of. You can be in homeschool and also be in the district. There is a state provided homeschool program that we can offer where, for example, maybe though that first month or so, or while you're waiting, you might decide, you know, we're going to do this for these classes, but we really want our kids to socialize and take these classes. So, you know, there's that option. I think some of this may have come up when people were afraid to send their kids to school. Hopefully they've heard now that they have the opportunity. We're not polling anymore. You can actually enroll your child in full remote learning. You know, as we look, and also I ask parents to hang in there with us for a little bit, because depending on how the numbers play out, if a high percentage of families want remote and we can figure out how to use outdoor space, it's possible that we might be able to bring kids back every day. I don't know yet until we get, you know, every piece is dependent on the next data set and the next data set and the next data set. So the next thing now is to find out where parents want their kids to be. And then for those parents that didn't respond to this plea to please fill out that form, we're going to have to pick up the phone and call. But we will do what we can within our role to support families being able to connect with each other. You know, that I know we can do for sure. And, you know, we're committed to that. We also want to explore how we can support our families. I was just thinking, Ms. Sink and Dr. Ryan, as we were listening to the presentation that Dr. Sanchez made, how can we use our digital coaches? How can we use our instructional coaches, you know, this time around to focus more on parents and families and providing them support, right? We really have put a lot of support in supporting our teachers through the online learning process, but how can we better help our families with that? And how can we utilize our volunteers? We know we have volunteers chomping at the bit that want to help us. And so we're open, we're listening. I want to tell the public that your board members are listening and they're feeding that information to us. And we want to do better at communicating with you and hearing your concerns and being as responsive as we can, and still keeping a lens as we're responsible for of a unified system of education and addressing equity and not exacerbating the gaps. I'm very proud of the work that Ms. Sink and her team and Dr. Ryan have done around building these instructional programs, and that's around ensuring that if this is paced and we work with our kids, that we can get, which we normally do, 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. Our challenge is closing those gaps and looking at that data. The other thing we're going to be doing is our formative assessments so that we can provide parents data. This is where your kid is at the beginning of the year. This is where your kid is mid-year and at the end of the year. Even if the state doesn't do their their normal formal assessments, I don't know if they are or not, we will have data that we can provide parents about their children's progress. And the other thing that I hope parents can hear from us is that Christy Wagner and that whole team, in just terms of keeping those buildings clean, having the buildings marked, having good protocols for transportation and food services. You know, we're doing everything we can to keep kids safe, and faculty and staff. That is our number one priority, is keeping people safe and their social emotional needs. I mean, I mentioned that before. And so we know everybody's struggling and hurting and scared. And we want to listen and we want to partner with you to help allay those concerns and address them as best we can.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garcia. There's a lot in there, and I do hope as we figure out how to support families connecting in particular, which was one piece you mentioned there, that, you know, we can put that in the FAQs, the all important FAQs document, and you know, those of us that are working on social media can share some of those pieces.
And that one's in there
okay.
about sharing the email addresses. So that is in the FAQs right now. But people may not know that. So if you all that are on social media, that you can let people know to contact their principals, that we can help with that. Definitely.
That's great. Wonderful, concrete thing. Dr. Gonzalez, you're muted.
Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Garcia, are you working with volunteers? Because I know that some have contacted me that, you know, last year it was too difficult to get in and do anything with students. There were some that did, but most of them did not. So how are we going to be working with volunteers?
So we have, and I wish Sabra Roybal was on, or actually she's Romero now, to tell you the number of volunteers we have. And we've had a very wonderful relationship with volunteers and a very large core of volunteers. And when we went remote, we couldn't just bring volunteers in. We had to get the teachers acclimated, the students acclimated. There was a lot of moving parts. So I don't think volunteers were brought into the picture, just asking the team, probably mid-April or the end of April. So, because we went into remote like the middle of March. So I think it was a good month before we had volunteers in. And then we got at that time, guidelines, like even for counselors, to not have children alone online with one adult. And I know that that was a concern of one particular group of volunteers. We have other volunteers that this has not been an issue. And we are going to continue to work on that. Our first priority is to ensure that children are safe. But we also don't want to be so bureaucratic that we don't allow volunteers to engage with our students. Not only volunteers, we opened it up even more with community partners. So Girls Inc. and Boys and Girls Club and a variety of groups worked with our kids through the remote learning program. And we intend to bring that back as well.
But the volunteers all need to be, they all need to have a background check, correct?
That is a state requirement. Yes, ma'am.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, we heard about the backlog. Is it the same backlog, do we think, for staff and background checks as it is for volunteers, a 5 to 6 week delay?
Madam President, I don't think so, because they don't have to go to PED. I don't think for volunteer background checks. I think it really comes from the state police. And then there's one other entity, I think, that does the background checks. So that backlog shouldn't be. But we really are going to need volunteers. And it really comes down to if they'd be willing to work with 2 kids at a time. As for their safety, their liability, and the districts, you know, we need our volunteers. We need tutors for sure. Actually, I need some volunteers right now that can help answer phones and answer questions. So if you are interested in volunteering right now to help us provide answers to parents and help us reach out to parents who don't fill out the survey, we're pretty overwhelmed. Contact Sabra Roybal, S. Roybal or Sabra Roybal at
Romero.
K12.nm.us. We can put that on the website for volunteers to contact her because we need help desperately.
That's really great to hear. And just seeing again, Dr. Sanchez's presentation, which was obviously focused on Latino families and students. I'm guessing you'd see a similar thing across lots of different demographics. That is basically, there was 75% were eager for individual tutoring. And so how we figure out and talk to our community partners and those who could tutor in languages other than English, particularly Spanish, obviously. And ideally, we could find tutors who can be sort of decently aligned with our students so that they speak the same language, because I know sometimes there can be cultural gaps and issues. But this is something that I am completely preoccupied with night and day, and just want to say we'll be continuing to work on. And if anyone in the community has ideas and wants to reach out personally, we'll be doing that. I also have discussed with Dr. Garcia and talking about, we're reaching out to some community partners, inviting them at a future board meeting to do very short presentations on ideas for supporting tutoring and distance learning in the public schools, because we really, and maybe this is our opportunity for deep-rooted community schools work, where we really do try and put together some integrated support and community engagement for our kids and our families. And because distance learning is hard, and there are some children who really just can't do it very well. And, I think we'll start to see different gaps that, maybe falls along extrovert and introvert lines and clarity, or who knows, but this is definitely unprecedented challenges.
We all need help. We all need that kind of help, even if those of us that are really tech savvy. And so you think of a kindergartner or a second grader, and their mom's busy, or they're not, they're with the babysitter or something. And so we gotta up our game in that area. But you touched on something, and that is that we have to diversify our volunteer corps. And that's something that I'm going to ask Dr. Lujan and the Community Engagement Department to really work on. We're going to I've reached out to Somos and to Miguel Acosta with Earth Care to help us with some Facebook Live events. And when we do that, I think we'll also reach out to ask, we definitely need Spanish-speaking volunteers.
Yeah. And, there may be people who have more time on their hands, or, the desire to plug in new ways. So hopefully we have opportunities there. Any other comments, questions from the board on this one? Go ahead, Board Member Bozay.
Board President Noble, members of the board, Dr. Garcia, I just would like to echo what Dr. Gonzalez brought up in that, we have an immense group of volunteers and people that have done tutoring in the past that are familiar with the way that the classrooms work and the systems that are in place. And I just would hope that as we're being creative with everything else, that we can always, with safety as the guide, be creative in the way that we can utilize those volunteers, because they're incredibly important and our students are going to need them more than ever.
Totally. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to the next item, which is related, that I also put, which is using outdoor space. And Dr. Garcia, you alluded to this earlier, and just as this transition sort of between these discussion items, which are related as to how we're doing things differently, engaging our community, and really trying to provide the most robust distance learning and community support, especially during this time. But there was an analysis piece in the New York Times that was titled "Reopening Schools is Way Harder Than It Should Be." And just as a bridge between these things, reading a particular quote that struck with me in this article, it goes like this: "The reality is that solutions like converting community or outdoor space into additional classrooms, or increasing the number of available adults through a new national childcare or tutoring corps would require a degree of shared responsibility, coordination, and resources that schools have never been able to count on. And that hasn't changed with the pandemic's arrival." So again, I just want to echo that to some extent, schools have been given all of this responsibility for the education and wellness of children, and that the resources and coordination is often not there. And we really had seen a systematic defunding of education, in my view, over the past couple decades, and things are pretty laid bare right now. And again, huge appreciation for the team at the district for what you've been doing. And I think we should be looking to our community partners at the city, potentially at the county, certainly in the organizations, nonprofits, maybe thinking about how our foundation partners in education can evolve and support us during this time. But on this one, Dr. Garcia, I know there's been quite a bit of work and thinking about, and this is in particular, I think, just in our universe of the Santa Fe Public Schools property and using outdoor space there. And just hoping you can talk a little bit about that, especially given that we have seen that outdoors is a much lower rate of transmission of the COVID-19 virus.
Absolutely. And one of the things that, we've been, somebody mentioned, they're concerned about someone having COVID and being in school, which is the whole, being asymptomatic, which is why we need people to have masks on, right? That's why people are wearing masks, because someone may be asymptomatic and be carrying the virus. And so, or to stay home when they're sick, but they need to have their masks on. But the period of time, and we've talked about this many, many times with Ms. Wagner and Mr. Romero, is when kids eat, when they take their masks off to eat. And so we really want to look at how can we maximize outdoor space? And they've already worked on this, our ventilation systems that will be bringing more fresh air into the building. That exchange will be much higher and greater. And so in the winter months, we're going to be saying to folks, wear a sweater, bundle up a little bit, because it's going to be colder in the buildings because we're going to be bringing more fresh air in. But they've also been looking at outdoor spaces and how we can utilize them not only for eating, but for instruction. And so either Mr. Romero or Ms. Wagner, would you like to elaborate on that?
Sure, Dr. Garcia. This is Deputy Superintendent Wagner. I think that you more or less captured our intent, and that is to capitalize on outdoor spaces for eating. And that might look like some form of tents or temporary shelters. It might be permanent shelters, bringing our cafeteria tables outside, or other mobile tables and chairs outside, eating in smaller shifts, using outdoor classrooms that already exist, eating in more naturescape or playground type areas. So I think there's a large variety of outdoor options, and not only are we assessing our current inventory and capacity on our campuses, we are also purchasing additional shade structures and temporary shelters for that outdoor eating.
And those spaces could potentially also be used for instruction, right?
Absolutely. I think that most of our schools already have spaces that would fare quite well for outdoor learning. And outdoor learning isn't always traditional. It's not maybe sitting in a desk or a chair. It's moving and sitting in different spaces. And so right now our big study is shade, making sure that folks have shelter when they're outside, whether to eat, play, or learn.
So that on top of marking spaces and traffic patterns in the schools. And I mean, I was telling Ms. Wagner and their team, they have a really huge lift when when we really talk about the safety of faculty and staff and students, so many moving parts, and they've been so proactive and doing a really great job. But yes, I'm really excited about it. And I think that, as we look at all the things that she talked about that we're looking at purchasing and doing, I think can be a game changer for instruction, and it's good to be outdoors for kids, right? And for the students. I mean, for the staff as well. And so I'm excited about it.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board on this? And again, it's one of those things that we might need our partners. There are often, clothing and coats that are distributed through the schools. That's something, if there's going to be more outside when it's cold, we might need to mobilize community resources around that. But, just to sort of sum up, there's a lot moving, and as Dr. Garcia said, there is support for families connecting, for forming pods, and I think perhaps one of the most important things I heard from you, Dr. Garcia, is for families to hang in there with the public schools, and all of this is being worked out at close to light speed, and this team is working so incredibly hard. And a lot of the solutions and creative thinking is in the mix. More ideas are always welcome. As I mentioned, I'm going to keep working on this, and just a huge thank you to you, Dr. Garcia, and to the team who's really just, I know, spending so much time and energy and working so hard on this. I also just want to say, you know, as Dr. Garcia mentioned, everybody needs to do right. Families need to do right by the children that they're raising and their own families, and that we really work to increase and maintain integration and equity, and that this also needs to be done without judgment and finger pointing and shaming, because everyone does need to do the best they can for the children in their family. And it's really a hard time. There's a lot of social stress. So the importance of being kind to each other and respectful of any individual decisions that families need to make. Okay.
And regardless of the decision they make, they always have a home in the Santa Fe Public Schools.
Where the price is right.
Where the tuition is just right.
The tuition is just right, yes. Okay, thank you very much. And just for the board, I'll probably figure out some way to sort of keep this item on the agenda, just so we can have updates and really keep track of the creative thinking and the innovations. And there's so much of it going on. I think sometimes we forget to tell the community. And that, as we also heard, I think in Dr. Sanchez's presentation, communication is clearly a great desire from families right now, and for more of it. So in an effort to make sure we are covering all of the bases in communication. Okay, moving on to advanced planning. Dr. Garcia, next week, we currently have a regular board meeting and a tentative executive session scheduled for August 4th.
So, Madam President, members of the board, we'd like to recommend that we cancel that meeting. We just got the unit value today. We really don't feel that we'll be ready to come to the board on August the 4th and could really use the planning time. As you can see, we're trying to stand up school. So we would greatly appreciate canceling the August 4th board meeting.
Any questions or objections from the board on that? Okay, thank you, Dr. Garcia. We will go ahead and cancel that meeting.
Thank you.
Then looking ahead, that means that there's a Citizens Review Committee at 6 p.m. on August 12th. There's an Audit Committee scheduled for lunchtime, noon to 1 p.m. on August 13th. And then our next meeting, which is set to be a study session, is on August 13th, though I'd imagine it may look more like a regular board meeting by that time. And we will certainly update on the board on that. Dr. Garcia is nodding. Any comments on that, or?
No, I think we'll just have to see, Madam President, members of the board, where we are with negotiations. It might look more like a finance subcommittee meeting, depending on how radically different the budget may look and what bars we're going to need. So we'll have to play that by ear, whether we make it a special meeting or like a finance study session with an action item. I don't know yet. So I'll communicate with you, Madam President. So we'll have to be.
Thank you very much. And then just also, and we can, Dr. Garcia can take thoughts from the board on this, but we had an idea to just move all meetings to Thursdays rather than do the Tuesday-Thursday dance, which in part can sometimes be complicated for Secretary Garcia. So I would just ask, as we think about our advanced planning and our schedule, that board members think about whether you'd be willing to just keep it to Thursdays. And that might, for those of us that juggle lots of schedules, simplify things and that sort of thing. So we may be bringing that forward. Anything else on advanced planning? Just before we go, as a point of personal privilege, I want to say for the weekend, happy birthday to Dr. Garcia. She may have forgotten that her birthday is on Saturday, but I, as somebody who shares a birthday on the first of the month, don't forget those and notice the starts of the month. So Dr. Garcia, I hope you will be taking at least a little bit of time off to celebrate and do something special for yourself on your birthday.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that very much.
Yeah. Okay, anything else? Thank you all very much for this meeting. We are adjourned and we'll be back together.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say to Dr. Garcia, happy birthday.
Thank you so much, Vice President
Yes,
Price.
happy birthday.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be in touch. Happy birthday, Dr. Garcia. Thank you all. Have a good
Good evening,
Friday.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.